Chapter 20 of ICD-10-CM is for external causes of morbidity. This presentation will cover the official ICD-10 guidelines specific to this chapter. There will also be clinical scenarios to practice coding what you just learned, followed by a small quiz at the end of the presentation. For each coding example, you will need to pause the webinar and use your ICD-10-CM coding manual to code the scenario. Once you resume the webinar, we will go over the correct codes, the rationale behind them, as well as how to locate them in the ICD-10 manual. Keep in mind that there may be more than one way to find a code. We are aware that there is a great deal of information contained in this presentation. Therefore, at any time during the webinar, please feel free to pause and replay as needed. It is important that you have already completed the Introduction to ICD-10-CM webinar, as you will use the conventions and general guidelines discussed in the introduction to complete the coding scenarios. As you'll see on this slide and the next slide, the codes for this chapter start with the letters V, W, X, and Y. If you remember from ICD-9, these codes all started with the letter E for external cause and were supplemental codes found after chapters 1 through 17, and then the V codes. In ICD-9, the external cause codes were considered supplemental, which is why they were located after all the numbered chapters. However, in ICD-10, the external cause codes are no longer supplemental and have their own chapter number, which is 20. This slide contains different categories of external causes of injuries, and the next slide contains even more. This slide contains the rest of the sections from Chapter 19. The external cause codes are for the classification of environmental events and circumstances as the cause of injury and other adverse effects. When a code from this section is applicable, it will always be a secondary code to a code from another chapter of ICD-10 indicating the nature of the condition. Usually, the condition will come from Chapter 19 for injury, poisoning, and certain other consequences of external causes. However, conditions from other chapters that are documented as being due to external causes can also be used with external cause codes to provide additional information as to the cause of the condition. I want to stress that there is no national requirement for mandatory ICD-10-CM external cause code reporting. The guidelines state that unless a provider is subject to a state-based external cause code reporting mandate, or these codes are required by a particular payer, reporting of the external cause codes is not required. However, providers are encouraged to voluntarily report external cause codes as they provide valuable data for injury research and evaluation of injury prevention strategies. Coding for external causes is always done using the Index to External Causes, which starts on page 387 of the Optum 2015 ICD-10-CM Expert for Physicians. If only one external cause code can be reported, you want to assign the external cause code that relates to the principal first listed diagnosis. Therefore, if a patient was admitted for a car crash and suffered a shattered pelvis, but they were also talking on their cell phone when this happened, and you only have room for one external cause code, you would use the code for the car crash, not for talking on a cell phone. And remember, the first code reported would be for the shattered pelvis, as external cause codes are never the first listed code. You're always going to report the injury first. Most codes in this chapter require a 7th character for initial, subsequent, and sequela encounters. You want to make sure your 7th character for the external cause code matches the 7th character for the associated injury or condition. Just to get a little silly, if a patient is seen for an elbow fracture after walking into a lamppost and is now in the healing phase, and the fracture is healing well, your first code is for the elbow fracture with a 7th character of D for subsequent encounter for closed fracture with routine healing, and your second code would be walked into a lamppost with a 7th character of D for subsequent encounter. The external cause codes are intended to provide data for injury research and evaluation of injury prevention strategies. They capture how the injury or health condition happened, which is the cause, the intent, which is unintentional or accidental or intentional, such as suicide or assault, the place where the event occurred, the activity of the patient at the time of the event, and the person's status, such as civilian versus military. I want to talk about intent, which is a component of certain external cause of injury codes, such as subcategory Y24.0 for air gun discharge, undetermined intent, versus subcategory X74.01, intentional self-harm by an air gun. If the intent, accidental, self-harm, assault of the cause of an injury or other condition is unknown or unspecified, code the intent as accidental intent, which would be subcategory W34.010 for accidental discharge of an air gun. All transport accident categories assume accidental intent. Undetermined intent should only be used if the documentation in the record specifies that the intent cannot be determined. Codes from category Y92, place of occurrence of the external cause, are secondary codes for use after other external cause codes to identify the location of the patient at the time of injury or other condition, such as a school or a gym or a barn. Generally, a place of occurrence code is assigned only once at the initial encounter for treatment. However, in the rare instance that a new injury occurs during hospitalization, an additional place of occurrence code needs to be assigned. No 7th characters are used for category Y92. Do not use place of occurrence code Y92.9 if the place is not stated or is not applicable. If applicable, you would assign a code from category Y93 for activity code in addition to the code for the external cause of injury to describe the activity of the patient at the time of the injury or other health condition occurred. A code from category Y93 is appropriate for use with external cause and intent codes if identifying the activity provides additional information about the event. Do not assign Y93.9 unspecified activity if the activity is not stated. An activity code is used only once at the initial encounter for treatment. Only one code from category Y93 should be recorded on a medical record. The activity codes are not applicable to poisonings, adverse effects, misadventures, or sequelae. If applicable, you would also assign a code for the status of the patient when the injury occurred from category Y99. For example, Y99.0 is for civilian activity done for income or pay. This is especially applicable to workers' compensation claims. The patient was working at their job when the injury occurred. Other status codes include Y99.1 for military activity and Y99.2 for volunteer activity. These codes are used only once at the initial encounter for treatment, and only one code from Y99 should be used. If one of these codes is not applicable, then that's fine, just don't report a code from category Y99. This is the key slide for this chapter. Remember that when sequencing external cause codes, they are never reported first. So we would start with our injury as the principal diagnosis, and then here's the sequencing for the different types of codes from this chapter. Think of a cook who was working at his restaurant and got a 3rd-degree burn on his hand from hot oil. After reporting the burn code from the injury chapter, your first external cause code is for the external cause of injury, which would be the hot oil burn. Remember that the external cause of injury codes require a seventh character that should match the injury seventh character for the current episode of care. This would be followed by the place of occurrence code, which in our example is a restaurant. Next is the activity code, which would be cooking. Finally, the status of the patient, if applicable, and in our example it is important because the cook was at work, so we would use the code for civilian activity done for income or pay. Remember, this is for initial encounters only. For subsequent encounters, only the external cause of injury is coded, which would be the hot oil burn, following the third-degree burn of hand code. I wanted to show you what the actual codes would be for our example on the previous slide of our cook with a third-degree burn on the back of his right hand caused by hot oil in his restaurant while he was working when he reports to the ED. Remember, our first code will always be the injury or condition, which in this case would be T23.361A for burn of third degree of back of right hand, initial encounter. The next code is for the external cause of the injury, which is X10.2XXA for contact with fats and cooking oils, initial encounter. Remember that the two seventh characters for injury and external cause of injury must always match, which in this case is A for initial encounter. Now we have our more supplementary codes from this chapter. Our place of occurrence, which is Y92.511, restaurant or cafe as the place of occurrence of the external cause. This is followed by our activity, Y93.G3, activity cooking and baking, and finally our status, which is Y99.0, civilian activity done for income or pay. Remember that all these codes are only needed for the first time the patient reports for treatment, and all four different types of external cause codes may not be applicable to every situation. I want to go over how to look up these codes before we practice with some examples. The first code is located by utilizing the alphabetic index. You would start at burn, then find the anatomic site and degree with appropriate seventh character in the tabular index. After coding for the burn, you're going to move to the index of external causes, which for the Optum 2015 ICD-10-CM Expert for Physicians starts on page 387. Since the external cause of injury is hot oil burn, go to burn in the index of external causes, then find hot indented below. Indented below hot is oil with cooking in parentheses, which points to X10.2 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. You would then go to X10.2 in the tabular, where we see that a seventh character is required. We know we need A for initial encounter since the patient is just reporting to the ED, but since the code is only 4 digits long, we need 2 X placeholders so that the seventh character A can be in the seventh character spot. The next code needed is for the place of occurrence, and to find this you would go to the phrase place of occurrence and the index of external causes. From there, find the word restaurant, which points to Y92.511, which you would then confirm in the tabular. The next code is for the activity, and you would locate activity in the index of external causes, then look for cooking, which points to Y93.G3, which you would then confirm in the tabular. To locate the status code, go to the phrase status of external cause and the index of external causes, then locate civilian activity, where there are 2 options, both of which point to Y99.0, which you would then confirm in the tabular. Now I want you to practice. A man fell off a horse he was riding and fractured his right hip while in a field at his farm. He reports to the ED for treatment. How would you code this? Please pause the webinar to complete this example and then hit play to continue and learn the answer. The first code is S72.001A, fracture of unspecified part of neck of right femur, initial encounter for closed fracture. To find this code, start at fracture, traumatic in the alphabetic index. The other option for a fracture is pathologic fracture, but this would be incorrect because a pathologic fracture is caused by disease, and this fracture is the result of an injury. In the traumatic fracture section, go to hip, where there is a note stating see fracture, femur, neck. When we follow these directions, we get to another note stating see fracture, femur, upper end, neck. So after following both of these directions, we're pointed to S72.00 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. When we go to the tabular, subcategory S72.00 is for fracture of unspecified part of neck of femur. S72.001 is for the right side, but the book indicates that a seventh character is also required. The large box below category S72 gives us all our seventh character options. Since we know that the patient is just reporting to the ED for treatment, this is an initial encounter. And since documentation does not indicate that this is an open fracture, the default is closed, which is a seventh character of A. Now we need our external cause codes, and since this is the initial encounter, we need to code for every type of external cause code as possible. The first external cause code is always for the external cause of injury, which for this encounter is falling off a horse, which is V80.010A, animal rider injured by fall from or being thrown from horse, and non-collision accident, initial encounter. To locate this code, start at accident in the index to external causes. I know your brain might not normally default to accident for falling off a horse, but accident will actually be the starting point for many external cause of injury codes. Indented below accident, look for transport, then animal rider, then non-collision, then specified as horse rider, which points to V80.010 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. So we go to V80.010 in the tabular, where we see that a seventh character is required. We know we need A for initial encounter, since the patient is just reporting to the ED, and our seventh character episode of care must match. Since this is an initial encounter, we need to see if there is any other external cause information that we can capture. In this example, we know that the place of occurrence is a field on a farm, which codes to Y92.73 farm field as the place of occurrence of the external cause. To locate this code, go to place of occurrence in the external causes index, then find farm, and then field, which points to Y92.73, which you would then confirm in the tabular. I don't have any more external cause codes on this slide since the activity has already been captured with V80.010A as riding a horse is part of this code. I don't have a status code as documentation does not indicate that the patient was working at his job or in the military. Remember, we only use these more supplementary codes when we can provide additional information about the encounter. I want to talk a little bit more about transport accidents, and then we'll do an example. If documentation does not indicate that the patient was the driver or passenger of a vehicle, classify the patient as the passenger. It's also important for public health purposes to code things like use of a cell phone or other electronic equipment contributing to the accident, which is subcategory Y93.5, and also whether an airbag contributed to an injury, which is category W22.1, and the type of street or road where the accident occurred, if known, which is subcategory Y92.4. Let's try an example. You'll code the external cause codes only. A 21-year-old male was texting his girlfriend while driving on the interstate and collided with a pickup truck. How would you code for this for the initial ED visit? Please pause the webinar to complete this example and then hit play to continue and learn the answer. The first external cause code is V43.53XA, car driver injured in collision with pickup truck in traffic accident, initial encounter. To locate this code, you would start at the index to external causes, then go to accident, then transport, then car occupant, and then driver, because we know this patient was the driver, and then indented below is collision with the word with with the word with in parentheses, followed by pickup truck, traffic in parentheses, which points to V43.53 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. When we go to confirm this code in the tabular, we see that our 7th character options are for our initial, subsequent, and sequela, and since this is the initial ED visit, a 7th character of A is appropriate. However, a placeholder X in the 6th character position is needed since our code was only 5 digits long and a 7th character is required. The next code is Y92.411, interstate highway as the place of occurrence of the external cause. Since this is an initial encounter, we need a place of occurrence code if it's applicable. To locate this code, go to the index to external causes and then go to place of occurrence. From there, you would look for highway, which has interstate in parentheses, and this points to Y92.411, which you would then confirm in the tabular. Our last code is Y93.C2, activity handheld interactive electronic device. Remember, it is important to capture cell phone use if it applies to the patient's injury. To locate this code, go to the index to external causes and then find activity, which has involving in parentheses. Go down to cellular and then telephone, which points to Y93.C2, which you would then confirm in the tabular. We don't have a code for status since we don't know that this person was on the job when the accident occurred. For the last example, we have a patient seen for continued pain related to left ulna fracture. 5 weeks ago, the patient injured her ulna when she fell while swinging on swings at the playground. The physician now finds a non-union of the previously displaced transverse fracture of the shaft of the left ulna. The patient will be scheduled for surgery. How would you code this? Please pause the webinar to complete this example and then hit play to continue and learn the answer. The first code is S52.222K, displaced transverse fracture of shaft of left ulna, subsequent encounter for closed fracture with non-union. Remember that the injury code always goes first. To locate this code, start at fracture, traumatic in the alphabetic index, then go to ulna, then shaft, and then transverse with displaced in parentheses, which points to S52.22 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. When you go to subcategory S52.22, you need to pick the code for the left side, which is S52.222. However, we're not done yet because the 7th character is required. Since documentation states that the fracture is non-union and it occurred 5 weeks ago, the 7th character K for subsequent encounter for closed fracture with non-union is appropriate. The second code is W09.1XXD for fall from playground swing, subsequent encounter, for our external cause of the ulna fracture. To locate this code, go to the index to external causes, and then find falling, and then indented below involving, and then playground equipment, and then swing, which points to W09.1 with a checkbox indicating that more digits are required. When we go to confirm this code in the tabular, we see that our 7th character options are for initial, subsequent, and sequela, and since this is a subsequent visit for the fracture from 5 weeks ago, a 7th character of D is appropriate. Remember that the current episode of care must match for the injury and the external cause of injury code. However, we also need X placeholders in the 5th and 6th character positions since our code was only 4 digits long and a 7th character is required. We don't need any more codes because this is a subsequent encounter. Remember that place of occurrence, activity, and status are only reported at the initial visit if they are reported at all. Now it's time for our quiz. Our first question is true or false. Only one code from Y92 should be recorded on a medical record. The second question is, what sequence do Chapter 20 codes go in for a patient's initial treatment of an injury? You can pause the webinar to write down your answers and then hit play to find out if you were correct. The answer to our first question is true. Only one code from category Y92 should be recorded on a medical record. This category is for place of occurrence and we would only use one place of occurrence code. This code is only reported for the first time the patient seeks treatment for the injury. The answer to the second question is, the sequence for initial treatment of an injury is first the injury, such as a broken arm, followed by the external cause of the injury, such as falling off a ladder, followed by the place of occurrence code, such as an office building, then the activity code, which could be painting, and finally the status, civilian activity done for income or pay. Remember, the United States will begin using ICD-10 on October 1st of 2015. After the October 1st compliance date, it will be very important to verify that claims are being received and to check remits for denials based on the ICD-10 conversion. This concludes Chapter 20 of ICD-10-CM, External Causes of Morbidity. Please feel free to check out our webinars on all 21 chapters of ICD-10-CM. If you need further assistance with ICD-10 training for physicians and/or staff, please visit the VantagePoint website at www.vantagepointconsult.com or call us at 203-288-6860.